Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 13, where we're talking about everybody's favorite Martian Euro, Terraforming Mars, starring Matt Damon with terrible writing by Andy Weir. So this isn't actually related to The Martian, the book, or the movie, but if you like those books, you like the idea of somebody trying to survive on Mars, this might be a game for you. This is a hugely popular Euro game, and a lot of you have actually been writing us and asking for us to take a look at it, and so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to talk to you about the solo game today, but before we do that, let's talk about the news. So the first and biggest bits of news for this week are that the Spiel des Jahres and Kennerspiel des Jahres awards have been announced. So the Kennerspiel award winner for this year is Die Quacksalber von Quedlinburg. I have no idea what that actually translates to. I feel like I heard somebody else say the Quacks of Quedlinburg. So I think it's a game where you're trying to make these potions to sell to people that may or may not actually be useful to them.
Right, like you're a charlatan or something.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's the idea.
Okay.
So this is the Kennerspiel winner, which is the more advanced sort of gamer's game category. And it was up against Ganz Schön Clever, which is a roll and write game, which have been hugely popular this year. That one was largely considered to be kind of weirdly light for this category. And then it was also up against Heaven and Ale, which is by far the fan favorite, I think, at least in America. But this is the one that won. I don't know anything else about this game. I'm going to keep my eye on it in case there's a solo variant that comes up for it. But I mainly mention it here because the Spiel des Jahres this year is Azul, which has been enormously popular. Like, this is a mega hit game for the US. I think Michael Young over at Next Move Games mentioned that they've already sold 300,000 copies of this.
Wow.
Before they won the Spiel des Jahres. Yeah, and I mean, this game is just enormous. If you don't know about Azul, it's a family-style game where you are drafting little resin tiles that you're fitting into a tile mosaic. I mean, it's an abstract family game, and you get points for the number of tiles you have in columns and rows. I mean, it looks very smooth, very simple, and people are really loving on this right now. And the fact that it won the Spiel des Jahres just means you're going to see more and more people playing it. I think this is going to be a mega hit, and it has a solo variant available for it. So when I can get my hands on a copy of this game, we're going to take a look at it on the show, because I know a lot of you are interested in this, or would be at least interested to hear how it plays solo. So as soon as I can get my hands on a copy, you'll hear more about it here, but congratulations to Azul on the Spiel des Jahres. Second piece of news for this week is that Z-Man has announced a collector's edition, or a 10th anniversary edition of Pandemic. And nobody was asking for this because it just got an overhauled version a couple of years ago that you can still buy for like $25. This is a $100 version. So if you want to pay $100 for Pandemic in a suitcase, because that's what it comes in now, suitcase.
So what else is upgraded in it?
It has different artwork on the cards that looks a little more stylized, and they added miniatures to the game.
Oh, what it was always missing.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say this is a game that needs miniatures. Just judging from the pictures they put out, this is not $100 worth of content. Like, not by a mile. I say that here because it is a popular solo experience. A lot of people will just play 2 different roles, and because the game is simple enough, it's easy to manage as a solo game. If you love Pandemic and you're interested in paying $100 more for the base game in a fancy, bulky case, for your purchasing pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, some people really love Pandemic.
They do, and you would really have to love Pandemic. They haven't said actually whether the expansions are in this, but just based on the pictures they put out, it doesn't look like they're in here. And I imagine that if you buy the expansions, it's going to clash with what's in here because the artwork's not the same style.
Hopefully they're apart.
Yeah, I hope they are. If you're interested in that, that is going to be available, I think, starting at Gen Con. So keep your eye out on Pandemic Collector's Edition. Third news item for today is that Snowdonia, which we recently mentioned, I think on the last episode, is now getting an Automa variant. So Snowdonia is a very popular train-themed worker placement game. It just had a big new deluxe version on Kickstarter, And if you're listening to this now, you've missed out on the Kickstarter, but I mention it in the news section here because if you want to late pledge for this game, it will now have the normal solo variant that's always come with it, plus a new variant that has an Automa. And the bigger news here is that it's designed by David Turczi, whose name we just keep saying on this podcast. If you're interested in David Turczi's games, he's done Tricarion, and he's done work with Anachrony and Cerebria. If you're interested in those experiences and you want to know what he would bring to this experience, now you've got another way to play this solo. The final thing I want to mention here is that WizKids has recently announced, and I don't know how long ago this was, I feel like I might have missed it a couple of weeks ago, a game called SEAL Team Flicks, which is exactly what you think it is when you hear that name. It is a Navy SEAL themed dexterity game where you are going down hallways flicking little soldier cubes in order to beat up on some terrorists.
Right.
And I'm not really into military themed stuff, but there's something about this that I find oddly compelling, and that it has a solo experience built into the box. So if you want to sit in a room alone flicking cubes down the hallways to catch terrorists, so do I. So don't feel alone in that. I'm not sure how this will actually be. I looked up the rulebook for it, and it's got like a 32-page rulebook for a dexterity game.
What?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very involved, kind of heavy dexterity strategy game, which I didn't know could exist.
Right. Okay.
Just so that everybody out there knows that this is a thing. If you're interested at all in this theme, or you're just wondering what a solo dexterity game might look like, you might want to check out SEAL Team Flicks, which also is in the running for the best game name of 2018. That's all we've got for you with the news this week. So we're going to move right into our review for this episode, which is for Terraforming Mars. This is a 2016 Kennerspiel des Jahres nominee, the same year that it went up against Raiders of the North Sea and eventually lost to Isle of Skye. From Jacob Frixilius, originally from Frix Games, now published in the US by Stronghold Games, and it plays 1 to 5 players. Now, chances are if you're hearing this right now, you have at least heard of Terraforming Mars because it is a runaway success in a genre that does not have many runaway successes. This is a card-based engine-building Euro game where you work to make Mars livable for humans by creating oceans and forests and raising the temperature and the oxygen levels on the planet in order to support human life. And when you are playing this as a multiplayer game, your goal is to raise those levels and end the game with the most victory points. You are focused on raising the levels and everything, but at the end of the day, what you want to do is sort of time when the game ends well so that you have the most points. For the solo experience, you are just trying to hit all of those parameters to make Mars livable by the end of the 14th round.
Which never really says why. I guess a meteor's headed towards Earth and everyone's about to die.
Yeah, or just because Elon Musk said so, and that's why everybody wants to go to Mars.
Right.
Yeah, you don't know what your motivation is. So if you're a method actor who's also a solo gamer, you may not enjoy this.
Yeah, if it was really associated with Elon, I feel like you would need a tracker for fame of how many ludicrous billionaire statements you can make on Twitter.
That's true, but it may be associated with Elon Musk because everything looks cool. You're never actually running a profitable business.
Right.
At least not when I play, because upfront disclaimer, I am super bad at this game. I think it's really engaging. I see why it's popular, but yeah, I'm just really terrible at it. Just looking at the box alone and taking a look at the components, it is not immediately apparent how this got so popular.
Whenever I first heard about the game, I was kind of confused because I started, naturally looking through the art and I was like, this doesn't look compelling.
No, I mean, there are so many good-looking games now, even really great-looking Euro games. It's not just the, Cthulhu, Death May Dies, and the CMON titles that look good anymore.
Right.
Most of the time, Euro games, even if they're really heavy, have some great artwork and graphic design, and this just looks meh.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things here to say about the components. I do like, it comes with these little shiny cubes to track everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's never really been, to my knowledge, any cubes quite like this in a game. I mean, they're sort of covered with a metallic coating.
Right, yeah, like a metallic sheen.
It's a little off-putting at first, but I think they actually look pretty good.
Yeah, they're nice. And just visual, like the ones that stand for 10 are the biggest ones, and they're gold, and silvers are a little bit smaller, and coppers are a little bit smaller than that. So I don't know. It just works visually very well.
Yeah, that's true. And the fact that this is an engine building game, so by the end of the game, in theory, you're getting pretty high incomes, and so you're dealing with like a whole, fistful of these gold nuggets. It has sort of a nice tactile presence. Right. But that's really the only thing here that has a nice tactile presence, I would say. The cards in the game, which this is primarily a card-driven game, so there are tons and tons in the box. They are fine.
There's something bad about them, but they're not impressive.
No, they're not impressive. And the artwork on them is really all over the map.
Yes.
There are a few illustrations in here that are genuinely cool and good.
Yes.
But then there's some photography in here. There's very clearly different art styles. The whole thing just sort of clashes.
Yeah, it's a weird mix.
You can choose to find it charming if you want to.
Right.
I mean, it looks sort of homespun, like somebody was collecting pictures on Google to use to make a prototype for a game. And then as everything else became more finished, they just decided to keep these in here. And This is made worse for me by the fact that all the graphic design is done in kind of this cartoony format. I don't know. It's just garish, maybe is the right way to say it.
Yeah, and I would say the graphic design on the cards, not confusing.
Yeah, it communicates well, I think.
Right.
I don't have any problem understanding the iconography and everything.
There's never a problem with that.
No, it's just that it's not aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, it just doesn't look good.
And then your player boards that you have, you're supposed to use cubes to keep track of how many resources you have and what your income is. And these things are just very thin cardstock, I guess.
Yeah.
There's no indentation or anything like that. So if you one knock of the table and your income cubes are going everywhere. And that's not just me saying it because I'm clumsy. I've never seen a game of this that does not go that way.
Yeah.
Or somebody's trying to figure out where their cubes were.
Oh, it's very sad.
It is. And there are great secondary market components and trays that you can get to manage this. Game trays in particular make some really amazing ones that you can get through the Board Game Geek store for like $7 per player.
Okay.
Which isn't bad.
Right.
But, if you're going to buy one for every player, you're talking about another $35 you're spending on this game. All that to say, I think this is a $50 game if I'm remembering the MSRP correctly. And in my opinion, you do not get $50 worth of physical stuff in the box. I mean, I recognize when you buy a game, you're not just paying for the physical things. You're paying for the design care that was put into the game and development time and all that. And we'll get to that part later. But just talking purely from a bits and stuff perspective, it's pretty meh.
Right.
But looking beyond the components, when you start talking about the rules and how the game actually plays, that's when you get to the things that I really like.
I was really surprised because I'd played this game several times with people before solo. I think it was you who had originally explained the rules. So I already was familiar with them, but I looked through the rules again and was kind of surprised how small the rule book was and just easy it was to like read, get through. And yeah, it was not bad at all.
No, I would compare this rule set to maybe Zolkin or Five Tribes, Suburbia, something like that. I mean, it may be a little bit longer than some of those rule books, but for me, it just hits that sweet spot. Not much of your mental load is dedicated to wondering whether you are doing things correctly, at least in terms of following the rules. You're going to wonder if you're making the right decisions, but that's the fun thing to do in a Euro game. So rules-wise, it's really great. And the solo rules that are in the game, they come in the rule book, and they do very little to adjust how you actually play turn to turn. The main phases of the game are all the same. The main difference is that instead of, trying to manage when you're going to end the game and end with the most victory points, your primary objective is just end the 14th round with a livable planet. And if you get victory points, then that's just gravy. So the solo rules are well integrated, which then leads to a really smooth play experience. And the play for this game is very interesting. In some ways, this feels like a familiar game to me.
What about it feels familiar?
I mean, it's an engine building game at its core, right? Which we've seen before. Mm-hmm. And it's a Euro, and it has weird artwork, right? All these things come together, and when you first sit down at the table, you might think, maybe I've been here before.
Right, okay. Yeah.
But what's really interesting about this game for me is the card play. That's what makes this whole experience. Because you're not choosing from a set of 5 or 6 actions to take that affect the main board, the way that a lot of Euros work, even engine building type Euros. At the beginning of the game, you're going to get 10 cards, and you're going to have to look at these cards, and they'll give you different actions that you can take during the game. The trick here is that in order to keep cards to actually play, you have to pay 3 money per card you want to keep. And then in addition to that, each card has a cost for actually playing it and taking the action, which right off the bat is a horribly grueling decision. After you've picked that initial starting hand of cards, then every round you're going to get 4 more cards, and you have to make that same decision every round.
Right. And you constantly have the tension of, do I want to spend extra money for a card that I'm not going to be able to play now, or maybe doesn't really benefit me now, but I know will benefit me later? Do I pay that money and kind of set myself back a little bit for that payoff? Or, it's just, it's a lot of good tension.
Yeah, because each card has a set of parameters on it. So a lot of them will say, you can't play this until the oxygen is at this level. And if it's the first turn of the game and you get one of these cards and it says, hey, your oxygen stuff needs to be almost done, and it's an amazing card
right,
that might put you over the top at the game end, you're going to be tempted to keep it and hold on to it. But then that's 3 gold you don't have. And at the beginning of this game, money is super tight.
Yes.
Like excruciatingly tight. And you'll only be able to play 1 or 2 cards around as it is.
Yeah, and some of the requirements may not even be just for later in the game when something is like, say, there's more oxygen or something like that. It might be you can only play this card up until like -10 Celsius. Like after you pass that point and you keep warming up the planet, you can no longer use that card. So there's specifically early game cards and late game cards.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so all of that adds to the tension of those cards that you choose. Plus, I also feel a ton of extra tension on that first draft of 10 cards because you know that for the rest of the game, every round, you're only going to have access to 4 cards, which you're drawing off the top of the card deck. So they may be 4 cards you can't even use for several rounds. And so you want to set yourself up at the beginning of the game with as many cards as you can so that you have something left to deal with later in the game and sort of to give you some direction.
Right, because if you're playing it multiplayer, for instance, you can specialize a little bit more because your goal is not to terraform the whole planet by yourself. But you have to keep that in mind that you have to be able to hit all of your needs as far as oxygen, temperature, and oceans.
Yeah, and so because you can't just specialize and you sort of have to be a jack of all trades, that makes it even more excruciating. And there's not a card draft. If you're playing multiplayer, a lot of people play with these variant rules in the rule book where you draft the cards that you get at the beginning of each round. For you as a solo player, it's just draw the top 10 cards and then the top 4 cards and make the best of what you got. So you're really trying to deal with whatever chaos you've been given for that round. And this is a making lemonade sort of game. And when you look past the cards and that initial decision here, what you have is an almost pure engine building experience. You're trying to use the cards that you've been given to start to generate some income so that hopefully by the middle to the end of the game, that choice of which cards to keep and which to actually play isn't quite so terrible for you. But that means the first few turns are very slow, which is one of the things that is hard for me about this game. For the first few turns, you're going to feel like you're really doing nothing.
Yeah, that's true. They are pretty slow. I don't know, it just makes it feel that much better whenever the engine starts going.
Yeah, and part of the reason I think it feels good is because there are several different dials you can tweak. There's money is the main way that you actually buy your cards and play them, but then you also have the option to play cards to get steel or titanium, which are materials that you can use to buy cards with corresponding symbols. And if you are able to find cards with those symbols, you can spend those materials and they'll count as 3 money or 2 money for you for each resource that you have. And so being able to get to a point where you can pull off some pretty amazing combos because you pre-planned in those early rounds, even though it's slow in the beginning, the payoff, like you said, I mean, it's real.
And I feel like we should also mention that you choose a corporation that gives you a small advantage or ability, and that will also kind of shape what cards you choose. So it could be something like you can use heat as money, or you can get a better conversion rate to money with base materials.
That's true. And there are several of these corporations in the game, and I have not played with all of them yet. And I've played this game probably 12, 15 times. So each game feels pretty different based on what your corporation is, because your success is pretty much going to depend on how well you use that special perk that you've been given. And you're going to want some direction in this game, because you start getting these cards into your hand, you start looking at what the possibilities are. And I feel like it's pretty easy to get lost if you don't have at least something guiding you.
Yeah, I think so.
You know you want more money. Everybody
Yes.
wants more money. But there are other interesting ways that you can begin to engine build in this game. Like if you have an energy income, which can be spent to build certain buildings or pull off some cool card effects, your energy is always going to be converted into heat at the end of every round. So you may want to build up an energy engine so that you're more flexible when cards come into your hand. You can spin them and get their cool effects. Plus, you have the added bonus that you're generating heat, which you need in order to win the game. Or there are these other cards that you play down on the table, and then for the rest of the game, you have access to a card that gives you a specific action that you could take once a round.
Or just an ongoing effect in general.
Yeah, and those are hugely powerful. Like I played one this last game where I had a card that let me convert 1 steel into 7 money. You could only do it once a round, but man, I got that thing the first round of the game, and words cannot express like how helpful that is for feeling like you're getting going in the game, because 7 money in the beginning rounds is everything.
Yeah, one of the ones I got was just an ongoing effect of discounting all of the standard projects by 3, which isn't huge, but it adds up.
Oh yeah, it adds up big time. Those standard projects, we haven't mentioned this so far. You have the ability to play down cards and do things that can raise the temperature or plant trees or whatever. But then there are also a few standard things that everybody can do without cards printed on the board. Like you can raise the temperature by 1, or you can, create a lake or something. And they're pretty expensive to do it. You have to spend quite a bit of money.
Yeah, cards are normally a better route.
Yeah, they're a better route if you can pull it off. But if you just aren't getting the cards you need, this is a way out. Or if you just want to do more than what your cards will let you do on a turn, that's possible as well. And so, yeah, getting a discount for something like that is huge, because suddenly it brings it more into that card usefulness kind of realm.
Right.
You're also going to have these sort of one-time use cards. If you're playing in a multiplayer game, you use them to attack other players. It's sort of a take that card that does something bad to them and does something good for you. And I hate those cards in multiplayer games. Just like we said in the Raiders review, I don't like take that in games. I definitely don't like it in Euro games.
Like, things like that are okay if there's some way you can defend or kind of anticipate that, but this isn't that. It's just someone just destroys 8 of your resources, which would be awful.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of cards in there that will destroy like 4 plants or something like that in one go. And in comparison with the other resources, everything's hard to get. But plants somehow just seem much harder to get, at least for me.
Yeah.
And when that happened to me in my first multiplayer game, I just like wanted to come across the table at somebody. It feels awful. But like Raiders, this mitigates that in the solo game in a cool way, and actually in a better way than Raiders does. In Raiders of the North Sea, if you listened to our last episode, you heard that, there are take that elements on the cards in that game, but you just ignore them. In this game, these cards are still very much useful to you in a solo game. You just imagine there's a player that you are stealing things from. So you get the benefit of the card without hurting anybody's feelings. That's what I always wanted. And these cards are crazy powerful.
Yes.
Some of them will raise the temperature like 4 steps in one card. I mean, they're usually expensive, but they can be really cool to pull off. And so I really like that element of the game too, because, often you feel like you're incrementally getting better, and you can't really see how far you've come until the end of the game when you sort of look back at, poor you in the beginning, barely had 2 nickels to rub together, and suddenly you're pulling off these big moves. But it's incremental change. Mixing that with these cards that give you like a massive boon right away is, I think, a pretty cool way to handle a Euro game.
Yeah, it all feels just very good when you get to make those big plays, like you said. Also, I feel like we should mention the amount of cards that are in this deck. So it's a lot of variety you're getting.
Oh, yeah. If you're playing a solo game of this, you won't even go through half of the cards in the deck. I would say closer to a quarter to a third of the cards in the game. And we're talking just base game here. I don't have any expansions for this. There are so many cards. That is a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, because, in other games that use cards, you can sort of get an idea of what's left in the deck and begin to guess what might be coming up. You will not be able to do that with this. Some people might view that negatively, especially because the luck of the draw does affect you a little bit more in the solo game. But I think it's awesome because the replayability here is crazy.
Yeah, and the order you get those cards changes things a lot because, yeah, sure, you might draw one card in like a couple of games, but if you draw it in the beginning, like what that means to you versus drawing it in the end is very different. So
yes. Yeah, this is a game that has a lot to offer you solely based on the base game as you find it in the stores, just because those cards are everything here. That said, we've been talking about the cards so much. I do think it's important to talk a little bit about the board and how the board actually works, because the cards that you're playing allow you to put down tiles on a board. You put down a tree tile and you'll raise the oxygen level. And you'll put down a lake tile and, you're one step closer to getting all 9 lakes or whatever you need on the board. The positioning of those things and where you actually lay the tile is interesting because some spots on the board give you bonus additional resources, which is pretty cool. They're small. It's like, here, put a lake in this spot here and you'll get 2 plants. And in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't sound like much, except for you've maybe been spending 4 rounds only generating 1 plant every round. And so 2 is suddenly what you need to be able to put down another forest. And so the combination of the board play and the card play leads to some really neat combos where you can, play a card, lets you put down a tile. Oh, that gives you just enough resources to do this other card that then, triggers something else. And that chain reaction that you can set off doing that is, I think, a pretty cool element of this game.
Yeah, and that's something you can definitely do in the multiplayer version, but I felt like playing it solo, you could really pull off huge, awesome chain reactions.
Yeah, because nobody else is in your way.
Right.
You put 4 tiles on the board at the beginning of the round just to possibly get in your way a little bit, but they rarely seem to for me.
Yeah.
So it's not really a big deal. It's just like a playground, essentially. What a lot of games, I think, forget when designers are creating Euros is that your mechanics and everything do need to be cool. If it integrates with the theme, so much the better. But at the end of the day, I want to feel like I'm doing cool things. And often I feel like I'm just scraping by in Euros, or like I never do anything outrageous. In this game, you will feel like you're scraping by for a few rounds. But then by the end, there are times when you feel like, okay, I'm a genius, or I set myself up in just the right way that feels so satisfying when you see one thing trigger another thing in ways that may be even cooler than what you planned for.
Yeah, there were definitely a couple of moments of that I didn't realize that I was going to have a huge chain reaction.
That's happened to me a few times before too, where you get a few resources and you're like, oh man, this turn is going to be more than I thought it was going to be. And for me, I rely on those moments for enjoying this game because this is hard.
Yes.
Maybe some people out there don't find it challenging. I've seen several posts on Board Game Geek from people who play this solo, and they seem to have no trouble hitting their parameters. Plus, they get like 70 points. And that's not an exaggeration. I've seen those posts. If you're one of those people, I cannot begin to fathom how you do the things you do. I have played this, like I said, 12 to 15 times. Never won. Not once. Now, that speaks to how bad I am at this, because Carter, you've played it a couple of times now.
Right. I did win once. It was in the last round, but yeah. I won.
Well, good for you, I guess. So it's possible to win. I know that it is. But even on your win, you said it's final round victory, right?
Yeah, it was final round victory. I don't actually know what my score was because I kind of forgot. I was just like, oh, I won. And I was kind of rushed and then forgot about the victory points just because I was like sweating to get everything done, like, before the round ended.
And to me, that's the sign of a good solo mode right there, because even though I've lost every time, I never feel like the game is unfair. I feel like I didn't do the best I could to build the engine I needed to do to win. And it sort of motivates me to keep trying in the future. And I don't know, I feel real tension when I play the solo variant of this game.
Do people ever try to play it with like less rounds to make it more challenging?
Oh gosh, somebody might.
Yeah.
I actually can't imagine doing that.
Well, I know you're on the like solo like forums more and stuff.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody doing that. I will say I've seen people who do like solo competitions online. So people don't often talk about this in reviews, and I think it's a real shame. But some solo games have bigger followings and have fans who really love the game, and they'll go out of their way to create solo competitions for other players. And this is one of the games that gets that. So sometimes you'll find somebody who posts a solo challenge for Terraforming Mars where they'll tell you to start with such and such corporation and start with these levels and try in 7 rounds to get the rest of the way to the parameters you need, or something like that. I mean, so the replayability that you get in the cards and everything is further enhanced by this because there is a win condition for the solo mode of this game, but beyond the win condition, it's really just a beat your own score type thing. So I guess if you do end up playing this and you find that you're pretty good at it and you don't have any trouble beating it, as far as I remember, there's not a way to adjust the difficulty of the game in the rulebook, but there's this extended life the game gets through these online forum challenges, which I think is pretty cool and speaks to the ingenuity of the Board Game Geek community.
Right.
So if you have this game and you find that, check it out. You can find them often if you go to a game's page and to that game's specific forums. They're often in there. Or sometimes people will post them in the One Player Guild on Board Game Geek, which you haven't checked that out. It's definitely worth a look as well because it's populated just by solo game folks. So go there and check out those challenges. I think that all of those things together create a pretty compelling solo experience. The only thing I would say here is that we've said before that we like solo experiences that feel similar to the main game. And at its heart, I guess it is very similar because the round structure is pretty much the same and all that. But I've played this multiplayer and solo, and to me, the solo experience feels quite a bit different from the multiplayer game. That's not a bad thing here because I really like the tension that you get and trying to be enough of a generalist to meet all the parameters you need to win. But because other people aren't also trying to complete things, everything's on you in a way that is not in a multiplayer game. And so I find myself, when I play solo, pretty much completely ignoring victory point generating cards, for instance, because I'm so worried about getting the perimeter stuff done. I know I'm not going to have a chance to get victory points.
Right.
That's just a luxury. Whereas I would play in a very different way if I was playing multiplayer.
Yeah, because there's lots of opportunities to come up with like clever little ways to keep snagging victory points along the way, or this will net me more points, in the end. But yeah, you don't really have that necessarily with the solo game because, victory points are great. And I guess if you're very confident in your ability of meeting all of the requirements before you run out of time, you just have to make sure you get all the other stuff done first.
That makes this kind of an interesting game to me because games that feel very similar to their multiplayer modes and when you're playing solo, that's great, except that sometimes I find myself thinking, I don't want to play this with other people because it'll just be the same experience but longer, right? Like I would never play Marvel Legendary with a group of people. That sounds terrible to me because everything's so efficient and smooth when I'm playing solo, and it's almost identical to the multiplayer experience. So the neat thing about this for me is that it feels similar enough in terms of like the rules overhead and the round structure here, but I feel like I've almost got like 2 different modules to play with, I guess, or 2 significantly different modes, so that I still want to play this multiplayer because I know I'll play it very differently than if I play it solo. So just my 2 cents for folks who are going to use this to do both. I think you've got a very compelling solo game here, and it'll feel different when you play with people.
I would say thematically, though, it still feels very similar. Like you still feel like you're kind of doing the same thing, or at least I guess I do. Yeah, I still feel like I'm trying to terraform Mars and just, have these buildings. Because I will say also the description on the cards like makes sense and they feel good because you're like, oh yeah, I'm smashing an ice comet into the planet. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, apparently all the stuff that's on the cards, all the ideas for actually raising the temperature, they're at least theoretically plausible ways of raising the temperature on Mars. Unless I'm forgetting some really outlandish ones. Some of them are pretty far-fetched, I guess, like trying to hit a comet with a missile to get it to strike the planet's surface or something like that to raise the temperature. It's not likely that would be something that scientists would do, I guess, but there are some notes on the science of the game in the rulebook. And the fact that this is a scientifically grounded game and one that's theoretically a real possibility, for me, makes the theme of this just awesome.
Yeah, it really works super well for me.
Yeah, and in the Eurogame market, there aren't many games like this. There's a lot of trading in the Mediterranean type stuff, which gets made fun of a lot. But this really creates a well-integrated, cohesive experience for me because I really feel like, yes, functionally, you're just putting cards on the table, but it feels like you're earning projects that you're putting into play and that make thematic sense, that they would actually do the things that it's doing in game. I don't know. It feels rare to me that a Eurogame does it this well.
Yeah, I would agree.
There's more that we could talk about here about this game, but you get the gist of how it plays and what we think of it. So we're going to do what we always do and move into our final thoughts for this one. And like always, we're going to do that by talking about what's good about the game, what's bad, and what we think is just ugly. And for me, there is a lot of good in this game. For one thing, there are so many tough decisions to be made with such low rules overhead.
Yes, lots of interesting choices to make, lots of tension, but it never isn't bad tension.
Often I feel like Euro games are sort of divided into two camps where there's sort of the very restrictive, I can't get everything done that I want to get done camp. Mm-hmm. And then there are the games that have sort of an embarrassment of riches type feeling. And for me, this game manages to do both in the same experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, you do pull off these amazing kind of combo-tastic things by the end of the game, but often you're also making these grueling, like, I can't do everything I want to do type of decisions. It's the best of both worlds in one box. The fact that you can do all that with very low rules overhead and quick setup and play time. The only thing about setup that's slow is the shuffling of the cards because there are so many of them.
Yes.
But realistically, you only need to shuffle like a third of these cards.
Right.
Because you're not even going to go through that in your one game.
Right.
And the play time is so short for the amount of meat that's here. When I play, I finish in 45 minutes to an hour, which might have something to do with why I've never won. But it's a quick Euro game.
Yeah, it was definitely longer for me. It was closer to, I think, an hour and a half.
And that length is okay for you?
Yeah, I mean, it still felt good. It didn't feel too long because it was engaging the whole time. I didn't feel like I was like slogging through any parts of it.
To be able to play a game of this depth and with a solo mode that creates a lot of tension for you as the player as you're trying to meet all the parameters that Mars needs to meet in order to support life. It feels very great and tense and crunchy, and it won't melt your brain, but it might come close. I don't know. I just feel like it's a compelling package with a great theme that does the things that it does in a way that I've not quite seen anything else do with the combination of the board and the cards.
Right. And just how it ends, like the victory conditions for what you're trying to accomplish.
That's true. The victory conditions here, that I really like that. Also, the attack cards and how that's handled in this game, I really love that, and that all those cards are still usable in the solo game.
Specifically in the solo game.
Yeah. I don't like it in the multiplayer game. I like it better here.
Right.
And we've mentioned this before already, but the replayability of this game is so high. I think I mentioned in passing that I only own the base game of this, and I've never felt a need to get the other expansions. They look cool, but I'm a little bit worried that they would sort of bloat the game a little bit. And what's in this box is compelling. There's a lot here. Plus, if you did want a little bit to change up without having to get a ton of new cards to add to the game or a sideboard or something like that, a Stronghold makes this extra map board that you can buy that's double-sided that gives you 2 different new Mars maps to play on, which is a pretty big deal when you consider that, the board element isn't a very important part of the game. And it only costs like $12.
Yeah.
So if you ever feel like it's getting stale, you could pick up something like that. Because you mentioned that you were maybe a little concerned about how this would feel after more than a few plays.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, I haven't played it solo as much as you have, but I mean, I could see where it could maybe start to feel too much of the same, even though the deck is presenting you with a lot of difference. But I mean, I don't really know. It's hard to say for sure. But it would be nice to have some variability with the board because it is static. Essentially. I mean, there's the minor thing with the 2 starting cities.
But that's very minor.
Yeah, I mean, very minor.
Yeah, so the fact that that's a cheap option for adding on to this, I don't know, it feels good for me to be able to say, this is a good game, and also not have to say, but you need to buy this expansion. You can buy the base game and get, I think, quite a bit of play out of it before you'll probably be ready to move on to get even a small double-sided board. All of that is really good about this game. Really, the only bad thing I have to say about this game is the artwork, the component quality, and the graphic design. I struggle with whether to put this in the ugly category or not. I don't think it's ugly, but it just feels like a missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
In the era of modern board games, you can do better than this. Especially when I think about how many copies this game has sold, and I feel like 5 years down the road, there's probably going to be a second edition that actually looks good.
Right.
It makes me a little extra sad about the component quality now. But, if you can look past the sort of ugly duckling exterior here, not even ugly ducking, it's just the totally non-sexy exterior here.
Right, yeah.
Then I think what you'll find here is a really interesting, crunchy, smooth, streamlined game that's unlike anything else. It's just a shame that you couldn't get that feeling right from the beginning with the presentation.
Yes.
Is that going to be enough to go in the bad for you, or is that an ugly thing?
That's pretty much just, I would say it's bad. Because the art doesn't bother me. It's definitely the weakest point of the game.
I agree with that. That's really the only bad thing I have to say about the game. And for me, there's nothing ugly here at all.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of hype that surrounds this title, and I tend to mistrust the hype train, especially these days because things are popular for a minute and then nobody talks about them in a year or 2 years. I'm more interested in the titles that I feel like are going to hang around and stand the test of time, because there are too many games out nowadays to just buy something that's not going to get played over and over. This is not a sexy game, but it is the kind of game that I can see revisiting over and over for years. Playing a couple times a year, getting a great experience out of it, remembering why I like this game so much, and feeling like it was a good and worthy purchase. There aren't many games that I can say that about anymore. And for you, this may be your new favorite game, because some of the people who love this game, they really love it. They love it like Terra Mystica fans love their game. There is a whole community that's cropped up around it. There's new life for this game online through the forum play. So this may be the kind of game that you just obsess over. For me, it's not that, but it is a solid entry in my collection and one that I really enjoy. And so because of that, because we both really enjoy it and we think the solo mode is fantastic and the game is worth purchasing, even if you only ever play it solo, we're going to give this one the stomp of approval. Jacob Frixilius, the folks at Frix Games and Stronghold Games, they've just put together a tremendous package here that has gotten a lot of love, and I think justifiably so. So if you're looking for a Euro and you're looking for something a little bit different, check this one out because it is a solid solo experience. Now, again, we haven't played the expansions, but if we ever get a hold of them, we might do an extra sode or something to talk about what that adds to the game, but you don't need them. Just go out and pick up a copy of this one. And that's all we've got for you this episode. If you haven't yet, you can follow us on Facebook and see what we've been playing, learn about what we're up to. You can also do the same thing on Instagram. We're at Solosaurus Podcast. You can also send us an email at solosaurus@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so, go on to iTunes, rate us, subscribe. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more we can do with the show because more people will be able to find us. So go online and do that if you haven't already done so. And until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.